Look, I think my hope is that it'll feel relatively normal. I think things like staff wearing masks are going to be a huge change, and then ideally, the additional spacing being 6 feet apart will feel a little bit different. Things like using digital menus as opposed to paper menus will feel different. But our hope here is that we will make it feel as normal as possible. A lot of the work behind the scenes with the extra cleaning, especially in the high traffic areas, doing pre-shift health checks and things like that will be behind the scenes. So our hope is it will be different for sure, but I think that considering a lot of people have been walking around with masks for months now, it'll seem like the new normal in those opening weeks.
I mean, even for those restaurants and locations that are lucky enough to have outdoor space that can now reopen in a limited fashion, we are in Canada, right? Most restaurants they don't have most of their space outside. They might have some space outside. Most of the space is inside. It's unusable. Outside, you're limited in your seating. How does the math work out? I mean, I'm just thinking, even for people that can reopen here, you're upping your costs and maybe even making them higher than they would normally be, and you're limiting your revenue.
Yeah, look, so the budgets don't balance themselves in this kind of calculus at all. Look, first and foremost, I would bet the vast majority of people don't have patios. And so, there's a huge portion of the industry that is going to be closed for weeks or months on end still, which is a whole other problem. And then to that end, even with the additional capacity, you might only get 50% of what you normally get on your patio, which really might be only 10% of your actual capacity of that restaurant. So it is 100% a step in the right direction. Everyone is grateful that we are able to do something, but the math most certainly doesn't add up. The support is ending for rent relief if you're one of the lucky few that actually had landlords that applied so far. There's been no commentary on whether that's going to continue, considering sales will be down more than 70% for the vast majority of the industry. So really at this stage, without the wage subsidy and further support, I think that, again, it's a good thing and it's delaying the decision for a lot of guys to close. But without the government actually doing their job and supporting an industry that is on the front lines of this on the economic side, I still believe that upwards of 50% might not make it to 2021.
And when do you think we start to see that? I mean, when you talked about how long it'll be before the insides of restaurants are allowed to open, do we have any indication? Because that'll give us some sense of, how long people have to bridge to if they can make it there.
Yeah, look, I think if you look at it, we try and look at other jurisdictions to see what happens. We're very fortunate. We've got a lot of restaurants in other provinces and in Alberta specifically where, they just used common sense and said, look, it only makes sense to open both, given that what if you do on a day like today where at the beginning of lunch it wasn't raining, then halfway through lunch it is raining. My hope is that, again, if we can get cases down under 100 for 10 consecutive days or something like that we might be lucky and be like other jurisdictions where they've been allowed to open it up. But I think that we've seen with this virus, it doesn't have a timeline. It doesn't have a mandate to follow any sense of direction that we might want. And so I think that's where the uncertainty is really challenging and where I think the onus is on the government to step up and actually be there for people and not just say they're going to be there for people. I think actions actually speak louder than words. And I think it's really on them to see the failures in the programs they've done and the uptick in those programs to come up with a more comprehensive solution so we don't have it where 50% of the industry eventually fails.
So just be more specific for me, if you would. Which ones would you say have failed and need to be changed? What changes would you like to see, or new programs do you think the industry needs?
Yeah, look, I think the easy one to pick on is obviously the rent relief program for small business, which again completely bypassed small business. We've been very blessed. Most of our landlords have been very generous and stepped up where the government hasn't, and they've seen how bad it is. But there's only so long that can happen. I think that the government needs a proper rent program for the foreseeable future, really for the rest of the year, where they will help small business get money to landlords that also need money. I think that in places like Toronto, where Mayor Tory has asked for health reasons, and again, if it's for health reasons, so be it, we understand, but ask people not to go down to urban cores, yet at the same time has not adjusted and abated and fully reduced property taxes for landlords that they can pass on to us, creates massive problems and really I think is shameful that they'll kneecap the sales side of things, but they're not doing anything on the cost side. I think with respect to the wage subsidy, it's great that they extended it to August, and I think they have a provision in there where they can extend it further to September. And I applaud them that instead of doing it a month at a time, they did it 3 or 4 months out. But we need to know that there's going to be longer term support here, because there's no way that restaurants, even in the fourth quarter of this year, will likely be back at 50, 60% of normal yield sales. And as business owners, we need to actually plan ahead for the future in longer than one news cycle.
We've heard this elsewhere. Other retailers, kind of more traditional retailers, have said that the supports in place have to go on much longer than government seems to realize. I imagine that there are many voices telling government this. What are you hearing back about the appetite or the understanding that this isn't going to stop? You know, we hear December or even into next year that these supports are going to have to continue.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind that if the government does not extend the wage subsidy through the rest of the year and then likely for the first half of next year, barring some sort of remedy to this virus, that they'll have just wasted their money now. And the reason, just as simple, is that if landlords are telling us that they're only expecting less than 50% occupancy in the downtown core in their towers by Christmas, it is literally impossible to think that the businesses will be able to survive that rely on human contact. It just simply will not work. And I think one of the frustrations I've had with the government is, you know, I've got people in government that have been working with me, and despite me being a little bit more vocal of them not doing what I think is needed, is there seems to be at the higher up levels that the government just wants to find people that agree with them and that tell them they're doing a great job, despite the fact that you have less than 10% of people so far successfully through the rent program. You have a huge amount of people that were left out of the $40,000 loan program. You have no announcement yet on the larger rent relief program. There's so many things that they just seem to want to announce on their daily talk show, as opposed to actually putting action out there that'll solve problems. It seems to be the only real success story here is the $2,000 a month that they've extended on the CEWS program, which is great. And we have to take care of those people that aren't going to have jobs because the demand's not there. But it also created a whole problem where sometimes it's harder to get people to come back to work when the government's willing to pay them more money than they would otherwise make.
What's your experience there? I mean, we just saw today, I don't know the details, but the province of Manitoba is creating some kind of new program to pay people who are going back to work, which is a new way of thinking about this. But it's to get people off of the CERB and say, you know, you got to go do your job. Have you found it difficult with your restaurants to get people back?
Yeah, so I'd say that, look, we have people who have real concerns about health, real concerns about going on the TTC, real concerns about childcare and all of that. But you also do have it where people sit there and say, look, if I'm not sure I'm going to make that much more, or I might make less, why wouldn't I just stay home, not put myself at risk, not do anything, and just continue to get checks for free from the government? I think if you think about it logically speaking, it just makes sense that people would rather do that than go to work full time and only make the same or either marginally more or marginally less. I think the government knew that this was going to be a major problem. We had lots of conversations with them about it and tried to work with them on ways that we would do this differently, and whether it was changing the wage subsidy so that we had more to give employees who are willing to come back to work versus not. But I think fundamentally it's again just a failure in the programs that why the wage subsidy has such low uptick is because fundamentally at its root it's flawed, and for whatever reason, instead of admitting they made a mistake and changing it and making it better, they've decided to double down and continue on the same course.
And I mean, to your point that if businesses don't survive, this has all been wasted money, I think that's a pretty compelling argument for a lot of taxpayers. How many restaurants do you think may not survive this?
Yeah, I would be, to me, shocked if the number, if things can, even if the government changed gears, if even 25% failed, would not be a surprise to me at all. And I think that without actual tangible change, north of 50% likely could have a problem. If you think about it, Amanda, think about the downtown path and how many thousands of restaurants that are down there. They will have 6, 7, or 8 months of zero sales with some of the highest rents in the country, and they've had a $40,000 loan from the government that they have to repay. The wage subsidy does absolutely nothing for those folks whatsoever because there's no one there. There's no point in actually operating. And unless they have landlords who are willing to step up and abate rent for that entire period, given the government has come up with a program that really doesn't make a lot of sense, and you see it in the numbers where there's been very little to no uptick. Fundamentally speaking, math doesn't lie. In the real world, budgets do not balance themselves. We actually have to make a profit for things to work. We can't simply borrow unlimited amounts of money to try and solve our problems.